Stranger Than Fiction podcast, where we explore the unexplained and paranormal, spiritual warfare, and government conspiracies, UFOs, you name it, we explore it. Tonight, I have a very special guest named Chris George. He is a retired park ranger from the National Park Service. He has some very interesting stories to share with the listeners. So, Chris, I want to thank you for being on the program tonight.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank
I've
you.
heard some really good things about it, so this is definitely an honor.
Thank you. Would you kind of like to start at the beginning? What got you interested in the unexplained and the paranormal, and kind of how you got involved working for the National Park Service and
Sure.
and your experiences there, things like that, whatever you want to share.
Okay. Well, with me, it's kind of been a two-way street. Literally, I've walked both sides of the fence. I do have to say that it all began when I was quite young. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old at the time, and we were living in a small town called Leadville up here in Colorado. And this one particular night, I was laying in bed and I couldn't sleep, and I saw this man standing basically in my doorway, and I thought it was my father. And I said, "Hey, Papa, what are you doing standing in my door?" And this man just kind of cocked his head and looked at me, didn't say anything. And I says, "Papa, why aren't you talking to me?" And still nothing. And so I thought to myself, okay. And I thought, well, I'll play a game with him. So I said, "Boo, Daddy, boo." And the figure cocked his head again and walked off towards the direction of my parents' bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Next morning, I wake up, I go out to breakfast. My dad's sitting there, my mom's cooking. And I said, "Papa, why didn't you say anything to me last night?" And he says, "What are you talking about?" And I says, "Why were you standing in my door? And you didn't say anything." And he looked at me like I was nuts. And he says, "You crazy kid, I wasn't in your doorway last night." And I says, "Yes, you were. You were standing right there." And he says, "No, I wasn't. You were dreaming." So I just kind of shook it off and didn't think any more about it. A couple nights later, it happened again. This time it was two people instead of just one. And they were there, and I started to talk to them. They didn't respond, but I started to talk to them, and I thought, well, they're nice people. And they finally left. Well, this happened on and off over the course of maybe a year or so. And I just thought I was just talking to probably imaginary people. During that same time, I may have had an extraterrestrial encounter.
Okay.
And so, again, it was early morning hours. I was in bed, and I saw a blue light out towards the front of the house. So being curious, I got up and headed in that direction. And we had windows in the front of the house. And we sat up on a little bit of a hill, so you look down on the street. So I looked out the window, and I remember most distinctly that feeling when you put your head to something cold. Mm-hmm. It just numb. It makes it very numb. And I remember that very, very clearly. And down at the bottom of the street, looking up at me, was what I thought was this giant white owl. And I kept looking at it, and the eyes were really strange. And as I kept looking at it, all I remember was I was out. Next morning, I woke up in my bed and didn't think much more of it. But years later, I started looking into these things and started thinking, well, was this an extraterrestrial encounter?
Right.
And I also started to look into the aspect of the miners that were there. And I deduced that because we were living in a mining town mm-hmm. from the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And our home sat right up against an old mine. Mm-hmm. And so it was really, two and two together. Yeah. But from there, I'd seen UFOs. Mm-hmm. One time I saw Bigfoot at a young age. Yeah. So I was running the whole gambit.
Tell me this: the Bigfoot encounter, was it like what a lot of people describe, that they see it, they look away for a second, and boom, it's gone? Was it anything like that?
Pretty much so. And I had a lot of encounters as a ranger with Bigfoot.
I bet.
But as a child, I went down, I got mad at my parents, and we were at a campground. And so I got up, stormed up, went down to a stream, and I was throwing pebbles into the stream. And I heard some crunching off to my left a little bit. And so I looked over, and then I started to look up more and more and more and more and more until I saw the face. And it was looking down at me. And it really didn't frighten me.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of cocked its head and kind of made a woof, woof, woof noise at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just sat there kind of in awe.
Yeah.
And then finally it snorted one more time, and it went back into the brush, and I didn't see it again.
Mm-hmm.
And years later, as a ranger, I did encounter on several times different variations of what I, logically put together as a Bigfoot, and plus all sorts of other cryptids and you name it, ghost sightings and so forth.
Now, am I under the correct understanding that you actually have spoken with, the missing 411 author David Paulides about some of these things?
Yeah, I was one of the rangers he originally spoke to.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and we had to keep it quiet because of my status within the Park Service.
Yeah.
But, the information was not getting out.
Yeah.
And we were signed to basically a confidential agreement. And as I got older, I thought to myself, why the hell am I doing this? The parks are not safe.
Yeah.
People don't know what's going on out there.
Yeah.
And so as it stood, later years came along, and I was transported out to California with my folks and spent the formidable years out there. And I went to college, and I went to UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, they had a paranormal department.
Okay.
And the lead instructors was a woman by the name of Dr. Thelma Moss. And she and a couple of the other instructors had investigated the entity case. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I believe there was a movie based on that, correct?
Yes, it was a demonic haunting.
Yes.
And so it had to have been the hardest course I had ever taken.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that they did was they tried to show how to debunk everything.
Mm-hmm.
Go in there and rule out all the stuff that could be explained.
Yeah.
But the other percentage, which was about 80%, but the other percentage, the other 20%, was what we dealt with as paranormal investigators.
Yeah.
And I was very honored to work with them. And at that time, the paranormal wasn't what it is today.
Right.
We were called the freaky kids, the spooky kids, and so on. And eventually, even UCLA closed the department because it looked bad for the college.
Yeah.
And now it's become this big thing that everybody has jumped into.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that there's not that many trained people out there.
Yeah. And a lot of them aren't looking to debunk.
No.
They want an experience so bad they jump on any little thing. And my thing is, I'm going to go to great lengths to debunk it because, number one, if I say it happened and I'm wrong and it wasn't naturally explainable, I look stupid, Yeah. But the other thing is I want to be honest. I want to be honest. And if it wasn't paranormal, then there's nothing to be afraid of. You can, okay, cool, I get it. But
yes,
it's been my experience. There's a lot of stuff that you cannot explain,
Well, and that's how it all got started. After I had joined the class, there must have been maybe 60 or 70 students enrolled. And by the time, even the instructor had said that by the end of the program, there's only going to be a handful of you.
Yeah.
And that was true. It had shrunk to about 14 individuals, including myself. And after we had, I even got a bachelor's degree in it.
Yeah.
So, and that is extremely rare.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody that has a degree in paranormal psychosis or psychology. And it really showed me a lot. And so I had gotten involved with a couple groups, including the one from UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And it really opened my eyes. But after I left that, I started my own group, which is Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. Mm-hmm. And that started back in 96. So we're looking at 27 years.
That's still ahead of the game, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And it only was with myself and my dear good friend Jared. And since I was a park ranger at that time, I was transferred to various locations. And it came out that I was the to-go guy in the Park Service for paranormal activity within the parks.
Yeah.
And because, again, a lot of these parks are historical in nature, or they have some environments that kind of gear towards that. Yeah. So the Park Service put me into that. And I started out basically, working varied local parks and so on. And then I went into the national park setting. Mm-hmm. But something was happening, they would call me in and I would investigate it. And that was one of the things is I had my law enforcement training. Mm-hmm. And you looked at it from one side, from basically your law enforcement and forensic elements to do an investigation. Mm-hmm. And then you have your paranormal research abilities to go hand in hand. This disgruntle or dispute a paranormal act. And it happened quite a bit. And so for each location I was stationed, I would open up another branch of the Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse.
That's okay.
Medication.
You need a drink or anything? You take a break if you need a drink or anything, okay?
Let me take a little swig here.
Yep, absolutely. You know, it's really interesting. I really feel like, in all honesty, I feel like everything ties together in the end and it's all related. And it's even interesting, like you saw the entities in your room. Yep. Then you had the UFO phenomenon. You had the owl, that to me, that all going along. And I know for some strange reason, those things do go together. And for some strange reason, a lot of the people that had the UFO or alien experiences, they a lot of times in their mind are thinking it was an owl and it wasn't.
Right.
And I think it all, personally, I really feel like it all ties together.
Sure.
And I think it's evil. I really think that in the long run, it's not something good. And when you're talking about the park things and that things were going on there, there's a lot of people disappearing inexplicably. Yeah. There is, all kinds of search efforts put out. They can't find them, or when they do find them, it doesn't make any sense. I will share with you. I mentioned this to you, outside the show, that there is a story that I share in the second edition of 225th Street, where there was an individual who lived in that house at 225th Street that I wrote about prior to me being there. And a lot of the locals felt that he was possessed. He had some very strange behavior, quote unquote, psych problems. Right. And as it turned out, most of the people that lived there would feel like stuff followed them.
Really?
When they left, and he in 2014 disappeared from Worcester, Ohio. His mother filed a missing persons report. He was 46. Don't quote me. It could have been 44, but I believe he was 46 years old. He is later found in Manning, South Carolina, in a ditch, submerged in water, face down. He is dead. There is no cause of death able to be determined.
Right.
from an autopsy. The autopsy could not determine any cause of death. He had, when I spoke with the coroner's office, I said, was there any drugs or alcohol in his system?
Right.
And they said, not enough to do anything. They said there were no drugs, except there was a little bit of caffeine and a little bit of alcohol. Well, the caffeine was likely a cup of coffee he drank that day before he died, or before he was missing, whatever. And the alcohol was probably his body decomposing, and alcohol showed up in his bloodstream because of decomposition. But either way, there's no explanation for any of it. You know, the coroner's office told me this is a very strange case. This is very weird. They said, we don't know what killed him. They said where he was found doesn't even make sense. You wouldn't even have been on that road unless you lived there, which he did not. He was separated from his cell phone prior to going missing. Right. When I say going missing, when he was separated from his cell phone at some point after he arrived in South Carolina, because his cell phone was found in a Hardee's restaurant. Never came back for it. Nobody knows how it got there. You know, there's no record that anybody actually saw him there. You know, it's very strange, and it's so similar to the missing 411 cases, like the urban disappearances, found in a body of water, no cause of death able to be determined, get separated from their cell phone or their strange cell phone activity right before they die, before they're believed to have died, you know. And I believe wholeheartedly that, and I link in 225th Street, I link there was actually a deliverance done on a person who had a demonic attachment from 225th Street on the same day that he was determined to have died. Yeah. And I suspect that it's very possible when the demon was detached from the person that it was attached to, it was reassigned to someone else from that house. That sounds crazy, but it's at the very least, it's a massive coincidence, you know?
Well, and there again, just like we were saying earlier, there is usually a connection. And I've been doing this, like I said, for nearly 55 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And it shows you that there is an entanglement in the whole aspect of it. Mm-hmm. And the paranormal has a tendency of choosing you versus you choosing paranormal.
I agree.
And I always say, once you look into the abyss has a tendency to look back.
That's right.
You're noticed.
And you're forever changed.
You are. You really truly are. Mm-hmm. And I mean, my life has always been being either a park ranger or being a paranormal investigator. Mm-hmm. And it really goes to show you that there is a reason behind things.
Yes.
And I learned that more so after I had created APRO and visiting these different sites and encountering and dealing with all of the team members that I have. Yes. And I'm very, very fortunate. Everybody that I have on my teams throughout the country, and we have, let's see now, we've got a chapter in California, one in Texas, one in Florida, one in New York, one in Nebraska, and two here in Colorado, and one in Aberdeenshire, Scotland.
Wow, that's cool.
And one in Nagasaki, Japan.
Wow. I bet there's a lot of activity in Scotland and Japan.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the problem with Japan is that it's such an old culture that it's almost taboo to speak about paranormal activity. Mm-hmm. And so our investigator happens to be an American, but she's lived over there. And the team that she's compiled is basically more modernized Japanese students and American students that are there.
Yeah.
But, we're getting a lot of interest across in Europe. We're looking to try to get a chapter started in York, England, as well as in Romania, just because it was once Transylvania. But one in Germany, one in France, one in Italy. A lot of old culture is there.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're
Go ahead. Sorry.
We're just one of the few groups that took off that has become a very, I wouldn't say a success, because we all are trying to reach the same goal.
Mhm.
Some in other ways than others,
Yeah.
but we're trying to learn what's on the other side.
One thing that for me, like the shows like Ghost Hunters and things like that, and a haunting back in the day, I'm living in a house at that time back in the early 2000s that was haunted, and I built the house with my ex-wife. We had it built to our specs. We did a lot of the work ourselves, a lot of the woodwork, the painting, all this ourselves,
Sure.
And there's all this activity in the house, and I'm like, how can it be haunted? It's a new house, But the one thing that, I have a different view than a lot of the paranormal people. I believe it's real. That's not the difference, believe me. But the one thing to me that was helpful was, at least they are proving that this stuff is real. It absolutely is real. And the people that are experiencing it, legitimately experiencing it, are not crazy.
Right.
Because when you're in that environment, you get attacked so many different ways and oppressed so many different ways. And it's extremely frustrating. It's very terrifying at times, So that was one thing when I would watch those shows, it was like, okay, this is for real, because I was like, I grew up in church. I always believed in the devil. I believed in God. I believed in the devil. I believed in angels and demons, whatnot. I heard stories of deliverances occasionally, once in a great while, even growing up. But until you really experience it, it's a whole different thing. It's like,
sure,
there is this is very real, and you don't really know what to do at first. At least I didn't, to deal with it.
Right. Well, it's ironic that you should say that, because my first quote unquote diabolical investigation happened when I wasn't even involved with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised Catholic, and I went to a Catholic high school.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody knew I was interested in the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
So this one day, Father Robert was one of those teachers that I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And this was back in the 70s, of course. And so he comes up to me and he says, "Chris, can I talk to you for a second?" And I said, "Sure, Father, what's up?" He says, "I know you're interested in ghosts and things like that." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I want to ask you a favor, but you don't have to accept if you don't want to."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay." He says, "I have to go visit a family here in the parish," and that was in Downey, California.
Mm-hmm.
"And I just need somebody to be a witness. I need to go talk to them about some things that are happening to their family.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't have to do anything. You just sit and observe. And, if anything happens, you can be a spokesperson for it."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I said, "Sure, Father." And I still wasn't quite sure what I was agreeing to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we went the next day, and we drove up to this really nice home. It was a 2-story home. And went up to the bright sunny day, walked up the driveway and up to the sidewalk to the front door, and knocked on the door. And this gentleman opened up, and he looked like he was completely disheveled. I mean, he hadn't shaved, had dark circles under his eyes,
Yeah.
Just looked horrid. And I thought, "Wow, what's going on here?" Walked in, and there was this very, very putrid smell in the house. And I just kind of kept it to myself. But Father looked at me kind of like, "Do you smell that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so we went in, and even though the windows were all open and the drapes were pulled, it was so dark in that house.
Mm-hmm.
So we went into the kitchen, and he started interviewing the family. And the family consisted of the man, his wife, a young son, and a teenage daughter, not too much younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a tape recorder, and he started to talk to him. And apparently they had started having this activity of walls banging, strange noises, screaming, things levitating, people being pushed, scratched, the whole gambit.
Yeah.
And so we started to interview everybody, and all of the stories correlated. And one of the things that he was doing this for was to get a sanction for the church to actually do an investigation on their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was what my role was, to support the evidence. And so we kept going to each of the family members. And we finally, the son seemed to have been a target, where he had been thrown across the room, slapped, thrown down the stairs, you name it. And the girl, she came in and she said, I don't really have anything to say about it. I know it's happening, but I don't know. Nothing's ever really happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so Father and I were kind of at a complex crossroads, so to speak, because we couldn't find the instigator of what was causing this diabolical presence.
Yeah.
And so finally we went back and started to re-interview. Excuse me. And went back in to kind of put different pieces together. And we finally got to the girl. And one of the questions was, have you ever used any instruments that might considered bad, like, Ouija boards or seances or these? And she said, oh, I've used the Ouija board. And I went, oh, here it comes.
Yep.
And she says, but I've never had any problems. And Father asked her, well, have you used it with a group or by yourself? She said, no, I used it by myself. And I went, oh, dear.
Yeah.
And we finally got in a little bit more detail. And she was not exactly a beautiful girl. She was rather on the homely side.
Mm-hmm.
And all she wanted was a boyfriend. So she reached out to the spirit world.
Wow.
And so this boy had come through and said that he was her age and that he had died in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought that she was really cute.
Mm-hmm.
And so she asked, do you think I'll find a boyfriend? And he said, and here's the part, well, I'll be your boyfriend if you let me.
Yeah.
And so that opened up that whole can of worms.
Yep.
And so we were able to justify a exorcism of the home, but also an exorcism of the individuals.
Yeah.
It was attached to the girl.
Yep.
It was slowly starting to take possession.
Yeah.
And she fought it. She fought it so much. She claimed it wasn't evil, that it was her boyfriend, and you couldn't take him away from her. And so it caused the problem.
And isn't it interesting, since she was kind of like the portal for it to come in, that the other family members got attacked the worst just from being in the environment,
Right.
Because it was using her.
Well, and it was because she assumed picked on by the parents as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So it was going after her targets.
Yeah.
And but the whole goal was to destroy the family.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the exorcism worked, but it was one of those that really enlightened me of good and evil.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I had a feeling when you said you were interviewing the family and the daughter said she didn't really have anything, I was like, it's her. That's exactly what I started thinking when you were saying that. I was like, it's her. I don't know what she did, but it's her,
Exactly.
But, yeah,
and it's to me, it isn't really scary. It's more fascinating.
Yeah.
To go into these investigations and so on. Now, not to say that I haven't been scared a time or two, but it's like the old saying about a fireman. When other people are running out, paranormal investigators are running in.
Right. What that's the thing too. Yeah, there's times I've been startled, and so it scared me, especially like when I was living in those houses and I'm by myself in the middle of nowhere, like in Holmes County. It startles you, and it absolutely does scare you. It does, But then, how do you fight back? Because you can't give up. You're not gonna wimp out. You can't run from it. You can't physically fight it. So you rely on your faith. You rely on Scripture. And that's what I would always do. And I think probably some of the times when I had things happen to me, when I started praying, probably the demons were like, yeah, maybe we went a little bit overboard, because when he starts praying and binding demons, that's not good. We got to start dealing with, angelic assistance.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But it's still, when you go into those situations, and I've gone into a lot of houses, it isn't, you get to a place where you're like, I forget what it's like for normal people, because they're afraid of this. And I don't realize that anymore, because I'm so used to it. And you're telling somebody something, and then you're like, oh man, I'm sorry, I probably just scared them half to death, But
I always say I got more scared after reviewing the evidence than I ever did when I was doing the investigation.
Do you find that you have visitations then? Because that's one thing for me when I'm writing. I get a lot of visitations. When I do, spiritual warfare on behalf of someone else, or do deliverance on behalf of someone else, I get messed with. Weird things, mostly just to annoy. But there is no question it's spiritual. And it's definitely, I get a lot of it when I'm writing. When I was writing 225th Street, the first edition, this was back in 2000, probably 10. And I was sitting at a little Rubbermaid table off to the side of my kitchen with my laptop, and I'm writing. And I was getting close to finishing the book. And I ran upstairs to my office where I should have been writing. And I had to print off the table of contents so I could look at the page, look at it, and then type it in downstairs on the laptop. I wanted a hard copy to look at. So I did that, and it printed off as 2 pages. I go back downstairs. I laid the 2 pages down right beside my laptop. I walked back over to my kitchen. I have like 2 sections to my kitchen, one where my table is, one where like the stove and the sink and cupboards and everything are. So I go back over where the sink and everything is in the coffee maker, and I'm getting a cup of coffee, and I swore that out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black shadow move. And I thought, what? And then I thought, okay, if I start imagining things, then forget this book, because if I imagine things, and I can't have any credibility if I know I'm imagining things,
Sure.
And I went over by my microwave, and I swore I saw it again. This time it's out of the corner of my right eye. First time it was out of the left, then it's out of the right. And I'm like, man, what is going on? So I get my coffee together. I go over and sit down, and I go to look at the 2 pages of my table of contents, and there's only 1 page. And I'm like, man, I swore there was 2. Yeah. I must have left the other one up in the office. So I go back upstairs to the office. It's not there. I go downstairs again. I go back over to the table where my laptop is. I'm looking everywhere.
Sure.
And I cannot find it. Well, if you're familiar with those Rubbermaid tables, they have the fold down legs. So the legs are here. There's braces that come off of the legs to the bottom of the table to hold the legs in place. As a last ditch effort, because I could not find that page anywhere, I leaned over and looked underneath the table. And there was the page perfectly balanced on the support for the leg, perfectly balanced on it.
Oh, goodness.
There's no way in the world that could happen. There's no, and I was like, okay, you did not imagine the shadow thing. You saw it for real. And that's how this page got underneath the table. It makes no sense. And it was perfectly balanced. When I took it back off of the brace, when I would try to put it back on, it would not balance. I could not get it to stay there, And that's just one story. I had many when I wrote the first editions. I've had many when I wrote the second editions. And I'm working on another book now, and I have things happen. When I'm heavily involved in the writing and the research, I have things happen, fairly frequently.
That's not a surprise to me. We talk about using variable equipment on investigations, basically a K2 meter or spirit box or what have you. But it's like the Ouija board. The Ouija board in itself is not a bad thing. It's when you focus on that and you open your mind and your spirit to it, that's when it opens the portal.
When you use an inanimate object for the contact.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's like a recorder.
Yes.
A recorder can be a good thing. And it's not that I have not used recorders, but my thing is I don't go in and like, one of the houses I investigated years ago, 2014, and I'm writing about this in my next book. I did take a recorder. I took some equipment, took cameras and everything. And they had told me one of the things they had seen, and was even captured in a picture by a paranormal group who had been there previously, was a little girl.
Yeah.
At one point, the mother came home from work and saw what she thought was her daughter looking out the window. And she thought, you little brat, you didn't go to school today. She goes in the house and the house is empty, But I was like, yeah, that is not what you're dealing with here. There was too many other stories that were really bad. And sure enough, it was demonic. And I addressed it as such, but I did record it. Because if you get an EVP, it's still concrete proof there's something here, But
right.
I don't want to use equipment like a Ouija board, like as a contact point, But if I'm going through the prayers of deliverance and things like that, and I'm recording and stuff is showing up as EVPs, that's good evidence. And the other thing, I do, and you have to be careful with this, but there are times you have to be very careful provoking things. But I also think there's a place where you have to make sure they understand that you're there to deal with them, and you're not taking no for an answer, and they are leaving. There's a place where that is appropriate, but you do have to be careful with that too.
Absolutely.
But I've recorded those kinds of situations too. But when you use an inanimate object for any kind of a contact point, you are, especially when you're opening up the lines of communication with the other side, I think that can be very dangerous. I had a camera I bought years ago, went to help a family in Ohio, quite a ways from where I live. But I bought a new Sony camcorder, and it was a nice one. It had a lot of features. It had high resolution, whatnot. Well, we're on I just gotten it the week before we go to do the investigation, and a good friend of mine named Stan, he's into cameras, photography, and all that. He's good on investigations because he's very much a skeptic, and he will try to debunk things. And as a photographer, that he's got some credibility,
Sure.
But we're driving to this house, and we're in two different vehicles, and it's me and Stan are in the same vehicle. Me and the other people I was with, we were split up in two different vehicles. And I'm sorry, no, we were in one vehicle on this trip. We were in one vehicle. We were all in mine, and I was driving. And Stan said, did you bring him another memory card for this new camera? And I was like, I brought memory cards, but you know what? I don't know if I have enough. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
And he looks in the camera and he says, oh, don't worry. There's already one in here, and it's a good one, And I'm like, okay. Never paid attention to it. We used it. We recorded on the investigation. I go home later. I go to review the video, and there's already video on that memory card from the person I bought the camera from. And guess what he was doing? He was trying to conjure spirits through antique dolls.
Oh.
And he was recording it with that camera.
Yeah.
And I had activity, and I was like, okay, in my house after that, I was like, am I having the activity from that investigation?
Nope. Or
am I having the activity because I have this item in my house, in my possession, that someone else used trying to conjure spirits, And so it was very strange. I still have all the video of him trying to conjure. He was in a dark room with all these antique dolls, and he was trying to get them to communicate with him. I was like, yeah, that's probably not a good thing. So I prayed over the camera. I prayed over the camera after that,
Well, the thing is, I don't believe in coincidences. I've
Yeah.
never believed in coincidences.
Yep.
And I mean, there's reasons why these things are happening, and we are connected in some form. It's like you say, items just like videos and so forth can have paranormal activity. In fact, at the beginning of any video that we post, we always have a disclaimer saying it is believed that paranormal activity can result after watching a paranormal video.
Yeah. Investigation or whatever.
Yeah, to those means. But it is true. They can travel through electronics. They can manipulate electronics.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of the sayings I came up with on my own in Holmes County, because I had it so much. I was like, they love manipulating electronic devices, and so many people involved in the field say, yeah, they absolutely love manipulating electronic devices. Phones, TVs, recorders. Even the very nature of an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon.
Yeah.
There's no explanation. You don't physically hear it, but then it's recorded and then imprinted on the recording.
Right.
That's very strange.
Energy begets energy. So through that, they can manipulate the energy waves. But I think we walk so close to the paranormal curtain.
Yeah.
That it's so thin.
Yeah.
And people have paranormal activity happen to them every day.
Yeah.
But they shrug it off.
Yeah.
And because they don't want to admit to it, or they don't want to look at it. They want to be able to go home and go to bed at night.
Yeah.
Be disturbed by some force.
Yeah.
But we that are in the field, we push that curtain back now and then. And,
Well, I always say this. I feel like, number one, the spirit realm is more real than the physical realm because it's eternal. The physical realm will die. We will die. The earth, changes, all these things. The spirit realm is eternal. It goes on forever. So it is more real.
Right.
And I've talked to people that had near-death experiences or actually, after-death experiences and were revived. And they said that it's when you're dead, everything is so much more real than when you're alive, And I feel like Earth is the battlefield right now between heaven and hell. So Earth's in reality, we're surrounded by this stuff. We just don't, under normal circumstances, we don't see it or we don't recognize it. It's still there.
Well, we look at today's world in general. It's a nightmare.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, who would you open up the news and Disneyland has to have chaperones now for teenagers and violence everywhere you go.
Yep.
And there's no consideration for your fellow man.
No.
The belief in God is slowly diminishing.
Yeah.
All of those things.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't know if I could call it an epiphany or something, but I was doing not too long. I always do research into things. And I started doing some research on Revelations.
Yeah.
And the Antichrist, because I'd started to feel, it seems like times are getting short.
Yeah.
And so I started doing research. And of course, we all know the mark of the devil and 666 and the mark has to be on you in order to buy food.
Yep.
And you have to worship that person who comes as the Savior, who in fact is not.
Yeah.
So as I was thinking about it, I started feeling like I was drawn to certain things. And I was doing, like I said, some research. And I got into Old Hebrew and basically where a lot of revelations had come from.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that in Old Hebrew, www, like the World Wide Web, is marked as a 666.
That's interesting.
And so I further analyzed, for instance, how do we buy stuff nowadays? Through a cell phone.
Yeah.
Barcodes. And what's the thing we do? We put it up to the side of the head.
Yeah.
We communicate and we don't even see each other, and it propagates hate.
Yeah.
And, everybody, let's go down to such and such and be a part of this.
Yeah.
TikTok, destroying things and
Yeah.
hurting people. So my belief is the Antichrist may not be in a human-like form, but in a technological form.
I think it's all part of the same thing. I do think that. I think that that all that technology is, it talks about, if we're all going to be monitored, that's going to have to be electronically because, Satan's not omniscient and he's not omnipresent. God is.
Right.
So he's going to need ways to spy on us, to watch us, and I think it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the Antichrist system. I really do believe that,
Sure.
But yeah, we're definitely living in strange days. That's for sure,
It's unnerving. It really is unnerving. And you see a lot more of the negative in the paranormal field taking place than the positive.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot out of you. Now, in each of my chapters, we have certain individuals that are assigned certain duties. And one of those duties is being a demonologist.
Yeah.
So whenever we run into those things, we gather enough evidence to turn over to any particular faith denomination that the client is related to. So we wouldn't send our information, say a person is Jewish, to a priest or pastor. We wouldn't send a Christian home to a shaman.
Right.
It would be of their faith because that makes it stronger in battling what is taking place.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like for me, it always, ultimately, everything is going to come down to, I believe there's two main forces on the earth, and one is God, one's Satan. Everything good is, the saints, the Holy Spirit, that's good,
Sure.
And I mean the saints, obviously, the saints that are already in heaven, they're receiving their reward, and God bless them for it. But the saints on the earth, the people that are following God, and then the other side, what you have is it's not God, and it's like ultimately it's always going to come down to, in Jesus' name. That's what I always say. It always does come down to that in Jesus' name. If something's going to listen and it's going to leave for real,
Absolutely.
It's going to come down to, in Jesus' name, you have to leave, And I've experienced that a lot, and I do think sometimes it does matter also the intent of the people that are trying to help or doing an investigation. The one lady I spoke with last night, when she was a paranormal investigator, she said at one point, this house, they thought it was a spirit of a little girl. And then this house, was having all kinds of haunting. And it started becoming very, very clear this was not a little girl. And it was throwing one of the men around. It slammed him into a filing cabinet with his head, threw him on the ground. He was laying there, started crying even. He was manhandled by this thing.
Sure.
And she said they started praying against it. And one of the other people on her team said, don't do that. We want stuff to happen because we want to get it on video. And she was like, wait a second. That doesn't sound like the right motive here. Like she's like, that's not right, And that's kind of, you have to be very careful with what your motives are, And it is interesting to get evidence. It absolutely is, because you're proving a point,
Right.
But you always have to keep your motives in the right place,
Sure.
And I think sometimes with certain people, not everybody, but with certain people, they get to where that becomes their focus. There was a family, and I won't even say where because I've agreed to keep their identities concealed.
Yeah.
I went to help them in 2014, and they had a very, very, very bad haunting. And one of the family members had, he had cancer. It was definitely fatal. It was in his brain, his pancreas, and his lungs. And based on the stories he was telling me, I was like, he's got a demon, and that it's possible that came from there. You could actually determine the point where the demon entered him.
Sure.
And I was like, what if the cancer is really because of that?
Oh, absolutely.
Did the cancer when did that start? And they told me, and of course it was after that other incident. So when we went, now there had been paranormal groups there, and they were like, well, it's all friendly stuff, and you don't have anything to worry about. We'll do a blessing, but it's okay. You don't have anything to worry about. And meanwhile, he's dying of cancer. And I was like, I'm going to take the approach that it's very possible the cancer is linked to this. So when we did the cleansing on the house, or the exorcism, however you want to phrase it, I was very, very specific about if it gave him cancer, you are taking it with you and you are leaving. And I'm not here to play games. I'm not here to talk to ghosts. I'm not here to get evidence. I'm here to make you leave. And that's that. And I'm not taking no for an answer. And basically very adamant. I went through the property. I went through the house with that. I had people praying in agreement with me. And we did all the proper steps. And that was on December 20th of 2014. I believe it was February 5th, 2015. The mother and the wife of the family contacted me and said that he had gone back to the doctor, and the doctor said he was a walking miracle. They said, you have no more cancer in your brain or your pancreas. There is still like a detectable cancer in your lung, but you don't have it in your brain or pancreas anymore. We don't have an explanation for that. He's still alive to this day. They're still celebrating wedding anniversaries, and his family, his children getting married, and it's like, that has to be the reason for, for helping. And the other thing is, it's like, you have to go in with the right motive, and you have to, you have to understand your authority. You have to walk in that, because there's no authority in my word and me saying it. It's all in Jesus' name, And so I think, in groups, I think there has to be somebody that understands that. And like what you said about the demonologist, okay, demons don't want to give up their name. No. They do not like giving up their names, because their name has a function attached to it.
Absolutely.
And a good demonologist will understand that, okay, here's what we're dealing with, and here is what its function is. Here's a very likely how it got in. Sometimes that helps you to understand how they got in if you know the demon's name and function. And so that is important. And again, I'm not Catholic, but I have learned a lot. There's areas where I don't agree with the Warrens, but there's also areas where I do. And some of the places I'm so much in agreement with them. I'm like, how dare the Protestants not talk about this? How dare them not to address this? Because this is accurate, and it is, and so I think, and of course, Ed was a demonologist. And it's funny, because he described Lorraine as a person with a gift of discerning of spirits. A lot of people say, well, she is an empath or a psychic or a medium or whatever. He described her as a person with a gift of discerning of spirits, and she was able to discern spirits. Yes. So it's definitely interesting stuff, for sure.
Well, it's ironic that you told me that story, and we kind of discussed it a little bit before we came on here. But I have faced darkness head on. Never knew I was going to, but I did.
Yeah.
I've survived to tell about it. But about 2 years ago, we were doing an investigation of this 1904 old hotel that had kind of shut down. It had gone to ruin, so to speak, but it was still a functioning hotel until COVID came along and shut it. And so we went in, we started doing research and so forth. And the story that was there was basically that there was an incident years prior of the couple that owned the Melrose. And there was a wife by the name of Sabrina, and she was Filipino, and the husband was English, and they had been seen fighting on and off. They had a little boy, so they usually would take trips like to Las Vegas. Well, in this one incident, they went off to Vegas, and the husband came back, or didn't come back. He had shot himself in the hotel room.
Oh.
And he was still alive, but they couldn't find Sabrina. And so his story was that she had taken off to nowhere. They just couldn't figure it. But they kind of felt something was really fishy.
Mm-hmm.
So about 2 years later, a farmer was riding his horse about, I'd say 20 miles away from Grand Junction. And he came across a skull. And the forensics department found out it was Sabrina's skull. She had been decapitated.
Wow.
And along with her death, which they think took place at the hotel, and her remains disposed elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
There had been a murder of a young child by his father, who was a trucker, and he was in the bathtub and he drowned him. There were suicides, and people went to the Melrose just to die, overdoses and things like that.
Yeah.
So we went in and we were starting to encounter all this. And we got a photo in the basement, clearly, of Sabrina. And if you put the photo next to a live shot of her,
Mm-hmm.
you can see it is definitely her.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is, above her is this very demonic face standing over her.
Yeah.
And it was looking at the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, okay. So there again, we started having fights amongst our crew. And it was really bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they kind of turn everyone against each other.
Well, they do. Excuse me. I took a pain pill and dries out my throat.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This all kind of leads to this. So, gosh darn it. There we go. So we were having bickering. The teams were falling apart. And the next thing, I got sick. And found a darn blood, not a blister, but a callus on my toe.
Mm-hmm.
And I brushed the callus off. And it got severely infected.
Mm-hmm.
To a point where it had to be amputated. And this was just a matter of days. So they admitted me. I came home. 3 days later, I got violently ill. Fell down on my bed. I couldn't see. Completely went blind.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, my neighbor came over with a package and found me incoherent on bed.
Yeah.
And if he had not come over, I wouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
And so they took me to the hospital. They found out that I had developed what do they call it? The blood infection.
Okay. Like sepsis?
Sepsis. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Very, very hard. And literally almost died from it.
Yeah.
So I rehabbed from that and came home. I still had the suction device on my foot where my toe was.
Mm-hmm.
And I got up and I slipped and I fell and I cracked my skull open and almost died from
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
And so got through that. A week later, I started getting sick again.
Yeah.
and got up to go to the bathroom, and I went down on my knees, and I could not get back up.
Mhm.
I had no strength. I was paralyzed from the waist down.
Yeah.
And so this was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just kind of dragged myself. And so I finally got the attention of my landlord. He came in, they lifted me up on the bed, took me to the hospital. Again, I had developed sepsis, but this time they had gone to my family and said, he is definitely not going to make it. His organs are shutting down.
Mhm.
He has already died technically twice.
Wow.
And I do remember being in the tunnel, but I felt so warm
Yeah.
and so cozy
Mhm.
that it didn't scare me. And I remember heading towards that light.
Mhm.
But then I came back, and the doctor said, you really shouldn't be here. You literally died the first time from sepsis.
Mhm.
Didn't think you were going to make it. And this time we wrote you off.
Yeah.
You really shouldn't be here. And you're technically the miracle man.
Mhm.
They called me the cat man as well.
Yeah.
9 lives.
Yeah.
So they got me through that. And as I was in recovery from all of that, I started to develop a sore on my leg. And they thought at first it was just a bed sore. But the darn thing started to grow. And it turned into basically a flesh-eating disease.
Wow.
And literally ate up the underside of my calf all the way to the bone.
Wow.
And so, again, I was in the hospital getting that worked on.
Mhm.
Finally got released from that. Now, this is over the course of a year and a half. And
Mhm.
for the benefit, I was home maybe 3 weeks during that whole time.
Wow.
So I come home. I was home for a little bit. Things were looking good. I started feeling funny again. And I went back in to the ER because I just did not feel right.
Mhm.
And they tested my blood glucose level,
Yeah.
which was at 942.
Wow.
And they said again, had you not come in when you did, you wouldn't have made it through the night.
Yeah.
And so they got me through that, but I had developed a infection, which is called a perianal infection, which is basically gangrene.
Yeah.
They had to go and surgically remove part of the flesh, and I had to get a colostomy for that,
Mhm.
along with basic healing and so on. And I was looking at getting my colostomy removed. Things have been bright,
Mhm.
been driving, the whole thing. Everything seemed optimistic. And I was supposed to go into the doctor last Wednesday for the ostomy removal, which
Mhm.
was only going to take like a day,
Yeah.
and the colon reversal. And everything was fine. Easter Sunday comes, and somehow or another I slipped, and I fell, and I broke my ankle in 3 places,
Man.
along with dislocating my ankle as well.
Man,
So
I'm sorry.
it feels like it hasn't given up on me.
Yeah.
And even during this whole process in the beginning, my my state director, who was a part of the group, he and his family started having problems as well.
Mhm.
And one evening he woke up and he was feeling really dizzy and couldn't figure it out. And finally, he was able to determine that the house was filled with carbon monoxide and
Wow.
the alarm had not gone off. And so he got the windows open, got him out of there, and it was only his place, his apartment, that
Wow.
had seen that. And had he not caught it when he did, the
Yeah.
family would have died through the night. So I definitely believe that it was diabolical. It is diabolical. But I
Yeah.
also believe it's something good and nurturing and positive. My angels are watching over me.
Right.
It's God.
Right.
And
yeah, I'm sorry you're going through all that. People do not understand a lot of times how dangerous this stuff really is.
Oh, it is.
It's very dangerous. And, there's stories in 225th Street, 2nd edition. There's stories about horrible deaths, horrible accidents that happened to people that lived in the house or while they lived in the house. This stuff's real.
Oh,
and a lot of people think, it can't hurt you. It can hurt you. Believe me, it can hurt you. And it can cause accidents. It can cause sickness.
Yes.
I will tell you this incident. I mentioned that individual who had lived in that house passed away in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
It was determined that he had died on Mother's Day, but they could not find out a cause of death or how he got there or anything. Well, on Mother's Day 2014, I was at my mother's house, and I was with my sister and my brother-in-law. We were all visiting. And as often is the case, we started talking about that house because they all experienced it with me. I lived there, but they came and helped me. My mother came there multiple times and helped. There were times she would say, I'm just going to stay in the house and stay up all night and pray while you're sleeping, just for the sake of being helpful,
Sure.
And she would always tell this story, and she brought it up on Mother's Day. She said, I'll never forget. Now, keep in mind, on Mother's Day in 2014, she was so hoarse, you could barely hear her voice.
Right.
Her voice was very raspy and very weak. She had since 2010, when I lived in that house, she had multiple issues with her sinuses, all kinds of problems, even had surgeries trying to clear it up. Nothing ever fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought it could be related to that house, but
Sure.
she had always told this story that she would stay up at night in that house and she would be reading her Bible or watching Christian television, and it would feel like something was blowing on the side of her face.
Yeah.
Like it was standing right there breathing on her face. And she would rebuke it and it would go away, but that happened a lot. Well, for some reason, on Mother's Day, she brought that up, and she's telling us in her very weak, hoarse voice, she's telling us about that again. And all of a sudden, my sister points at her and says, that's where all your sinus trouble is coming from, and you need to renounce that right now in Jesus' name. Mm-hmm. And when she said it, I was like, I don't know about that. I guess it could be because of that, I'm thinking, well, what's it going to hurt to do that, And my mom looks at me and she said, will you pray for me? And I said, sure. So my sister, my brother-in-law, and me got around my mother. We anointed her with oil, and we prayed spiritual warfare prayers over her. And I very specifically addressed any demons that had attached to her from 225th Street that were causing any of these health issues. And I said, in the name of Jesus, I sever this attachment, and I command you, I bind you in the name of Jesus, and I command you, you are going to leave, and you're going to leave now, Right. We did her in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay. After we're done praying, I said, well, I went and used the restroom, and I said, I'm going to head home. I got to get home. So my mom lives outside of town, out in the country. So she does not have good cell phone reception. So when I was driving, I waited till I got into the next town. And so I had good reception, and I called her. When she answered the phone, this was probably 20 minutes after we prayed for her, okay? She answered the phone. Her voice was completely normal. No hoarseness, no weak sound, none of those problems. And she said hello in a normal voice. And I said, Mom, your voice is completely normal. And she said, I know, the Lord touched me. And she said, I could feel it happening while you were praying for me. Okay, she was completely healed, completely delivered. Now, my mom's an extremely devout Christian. She's a prayer warrior. She reads her Bible. She prays all the time. She still had an attachment she didn't know was there. She never thought to pray against it because she had no idea it was there. She just thought she was having health issues. Right. And the interesting part, she's completely delivered, but then it's later determined that this other individual who had lived in that house dies that same day, multiple states away, with no explanation for his death, able to be determined even with an autopsy. That's a massive coincidence. And like you said, there probably are no coincidences,
No, I truly don't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They go after very religious individuals.
Yes. Yep. Because religious individuals are more of a threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They want to destroy their faith.
Yes. Yep.
And because that's the one thing that can do harm to them.
Yes, exactly.
And it's the battle between good and evil, and we're just the pawns in between it.
Absolutely.
And but yeah, it'll manipulate you. It'll try to persuade you through all these things. And like I said, I've been through a bout of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are times that I honestly feel like, okay, isn't this enough?
Yeah.
Can I not be relieved of this?
Yes.
But the one thing that has gotten me through this whole thing is I have never wavered from my faith.
Yeah.
And if anything, it's made me stronger.
Yeah.
And because I have seen the dark and I've seen the glory of God.
Absolutely.
And for whatever reason, either I wasn't, I was a bad boy or something didn't want me to come to heaven, or my mission is not over yet.
Yeah, your mission's not over. Exactly. I think God has intervened. I'm telling you this much, though, when we're done with this, I am going to be praying for you. And I'm going to get some other people to pray for you that this stuff stops. Because I'm telling you, I've been there. I mean, I haven't been through what you have been through, but I've been through the attacks. It's discouraging. It is very trying. A lot of the times my attacks, they come through the paranormal, but they also come through evil people. Yes. People who are flat out sold out to Satan. And the bottom line is one thing Satan will use those people for is when they're doing things to you, it's really hard to be forgiving 24/7 because they're wrong. They're doing things to you that are wrong to hurt you. Exactly. And as soon as you're not forgiving, guess what? He can attack you because you're holding unforgiveness in your heart. And that's a hard thing to deal with, But I promise you this, we're going to be praying for you. And anyone listening, I want you to pray for him and pray that whatever this is, he's delivered and healed. And this all stops, in Jesus' name, because enough's enough, enough is enough.
It is, because I do get tired. I mean, I'm no spring chicken. I'm going to be 62 in July.
Yep.
And I had not so much as had a broken finger.
Yeah.
Until 2021.
Yeah.
Yep. And all of this all at once, it wasn't a coincidence.
Right.
I mean, when you go to a hospital and everybody knows your name, that's either you're in an episode of Cheers or there's reasons for that.
Yeah. Definitely. Would you like to share, what are some of the strange occurrences you experienced as a park ranger? Like just some of the things that you witnessed and experienced that you still left you scratching your head?
Well, again, the biggest thing is the missing 411.
Yeah.
And a group of people would go out on the trails and they'd either have a child with them or an adult that was,
worth wetting our whistle. Got to get a drink.
I take that darn pain pill for my ankle and it just shuts everything down. I've been pretty good too. But for today, it was kind of acting up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always wanted to. Geez, what was that? I always wanted to be a park ranger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I set my goal for it. And eventually I did. And what? Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
God. Forget his name. But shoot. This is going to be a fun podcast.
Okay.
But I always wanted to be a ranger. And so I started studying for it at a very young age. And I achieved my goal. And I started from being a ranger to a chief ranger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thoroughly loved it. Greatest job in the world. And I think those pills are making my tongue numbed. Oh gosh,
I'm
I do
sorry.
apologize.
Take your time.
But I was assigned to Yosemite and for a season and loved it. But there were a lot of stories coming out of there. And if you had an encounter, you have to fill out a report and give it to the administrator
Mm-hmm.
who would review it. But unlike other reports, he would put it in a separate file and look at it. And the rangers I work with, the 411 Rangers,
Yeah.
always thought that was pretty curious because there was a standard. You wrote the report, it was reviewed, and it was submitted to the district office.
Yeah.
Not in this case. So a lot of them dealt with missing 411.
Yeah.
The thing is, people would lose children. That was the most heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And so we go out to investigate where they were. And it'd be two parents. It could be a group. And it just, in a matter of a fraction of a second, they could turn around and see the child and then turn around again and the child would be gone.
Yeah.
And so we would go out and we would look for signs, again, the forensic aspect of maybe a lion attack,
Yeah.
a bear attack,
Mm-hmm.
or even a subduer.
Yeah.
But you never saw any marks. And if a child is being grabbed or attacked, they're going to make some kind of noise.
Yes.
And nothing. And they're going to kick and they're going to scream
Yep.
as they're being dragged off.
Yeah.
And an animal in particular, when it jumps, it's going to make a noise.
Yep.
And nothing.
Yeah.
So, and then if they are found alive or even deceased, they're many, many miles from where they're supposed to.
Yeah.
This is going up mountains, cliffs, and so forth. And usually, if they're still alive, they don't remember what happened.
Yeah.
And the children that are found deceased, or even adults, always have their shoes removed, placed next to them,
Yeah.
but they're usually always facing down.
Yeah.
And so there's no explanation for it.
Yeah.
And you go about it and you file the report, it's submitted, and again, it goes into this separate file. And that would happen quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then there would be sightings of cryptids like Bigfoot,
Mm-hmm.
and people would see it. It would be kind of aggressive. So they would go ahead and leave the site and report it later. One strange thing that happened to me directly was we had a park ranger and another ranger go back into the backcountry like they normally would to do patrol.
Yeah.
And so they kind of broke up around this lake up above Yosemite Valley. And the one ranger went off, the other went the other way. And so hours later, he got on the radio to call the other ranger. There was no answer. So he kept trying over and over, called dispatch to try to get involved, in touch with him. Never answered. So the other ranger, started to backtrack and follow where the other ranger went. And he came around a corner. And up on this huge granite boulder was the other ranger. And it looked like he was laying back, looking up at the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the ranger got off, went over to him, knew something was wrong. And so he picked up his arm to check for a pulse, and it was just rubber. He went to the neck, couldn't feel anything. The head flipped over. Well, he called it in. The search and rescue unit came out. They determined that every single bone in that ranger's body had been smashed.
Wow.
But the catcher was there was no blood. So everybody started thinking, well, do you think he was up somewhere like in a tree or somewhere where he fell and he hit
Yeah.
that boulder? I mean, that's the logical thing.
Yeah.
But there was no signs of that.
Wow.
And so there had been a lot of UFO sightings in that area as well.
Mhm.
It continued to this day.
Yeah.
And so we kind of wondered if that was not related. And I personally, one time, which has affected me, was they call it The Predator. You remember the movie The Predator?
Yes. I know. I have a very strong feeling I know what you're going to say, and I never heard you tell this story. So I can't wait. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was on patrol by myself in the backcountry. And I was only going out for half a day, so I didn't need a partner with me. And I go out, and all of a sudden, everything got deathly quiet. And I thought, well, that's very strange, because usually you'll hear insects or birds chirping, not a sound. And I get off my horse, because the horse is acting really weird, starting to buck a bit.
Yeah.
And I got off to kind of calm him down. He wouldn't stop. And I heard this. I thought, what the heck is that? And I started looking around. I don't see anything. And then I finally start to look up in the trees, and my sight caught something that just didn't look right. And it was this predator, for lack of a better word, camouflaged, where you could see through it, and it looked like wrapping paper around whatever this was.
Yeah.
And it was moving from tree to tree, literally jumping.
And it's like in the movie Predator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we often thought after that, were these movies based on what people were seeing?
Probably.
And so I got the horse, and I wasn't going to find out what I was encountering.
Yeah.
But that shook me up a bit.
Yeah.
And there have been many reports, even in cities, where this has happened, where people see this predator type thing.
I have to tell you, 2 stories real quick. Man, I'm really enjoying what you're sharing here. That's amazing. But it just reminded me years ago, a pastor, I'm friends with him and his family. We were eating lunch one day together, and he asked me if I believe Christians could have demons. And I said, yeah, I do. I do believe that. And I explained why. And he said, well, I have to tell you something. He said, years ago, I dabbled in the occult. And he said, I did soul travel and astral projection stuff that I should never have done. He said, well, when I became a Christian, I quit doing all that.
Yeah.
But he said, one night, I'd been a Christian for a while. And he said, I was sitting in my house alone. And he said, something did not feel right. And he said, I said, God, if there's something in me, I don't want it. Please make it leave. And he said something came out of his mouth, and he went out of his mouth across the room and disappeared into the fireplace. Yep. And he said, you know what it looked like? He said, when you see heat coming off of the road in the summer, like down the freeway, he said, that's what it looked like. And it went, and that sounds a lot like what you witnessed, only you saw it in the shape of some kind of a predator. That same sort of a look. There was a house that me and my sister and my brother-in-law went to assist with in Ohio. A lady I worked with had issues, and her and her husband repeatedly saw something that looked like that. It would go from room to room, like getting away from where we were. We went to the back bedroom and started, rebuking things, and they're out in the living room, and I said, I felt the presence leave the room. It's not in this room anymore.
Right.
And it was a tangible presence. You felt it leave. And then out in the living room, I heard them saying, hey, they're yelling. Hey, we just saw it pass through the room. Sure. And it was just like what you described, but it was like, you could see through it, but it was like, the way you see the heat coming off of the road, that way it looks all, it's weird looking how it looks. Mm-hmm. But that reminds me very similar to what you described seeing. But that is amazing. You actually saw that, and thank God you were, it didn't come after you.
Well, that was scary enough, but I even got one that's even more scary.
Okay.
Uh, Again, this was at one of the parks, and we had a report of an accident that had taken place, and a car accident. And so we responded, I and my partner, and we got there, and the driver was DOA, so he had expired, and so we had blocked off the road doing, some investigative work and so on. So we went back, and we were in by the patrol truck, and my partner was leaning up against the truck with the passenger side window, kind of, he was right between the moldings, between the front window and the back window. And we're talking, and all of a sudden I caught a shape that was behind me moving closer. And I turned around, and I didn't see anything. And I looked back again, and it was right behind me. And I said, Terry, do you see anything behind me? He says, where? I said, right behind my right shoulder. And he says, no. And he says, what are you talking about? And I said, I looked at him and I said, I swear you not, there's something behind me looking, and I can see its reflection in the window. And he quickly turned to look, and he said, I saw something. I couldn't make out what it was. And I looked back again, and it had disappeared. But it was a god-awful looking face.
Yeah.
Looking at me. It was like something from hell.
Yeah.
Been standing right there looking behind me. And it really shook me to the core.
Yeah.
I didn't get much sleep that night. Did a lot of praying.
Yeah.
Didn't get much sleep.
Yeah.
But that was one thing that it was like, I know what I saw, and I know that they're watching me.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how far I'm going. And so faith really does play an important part of it.
It probably kept you safe.
Oh, God, yeah.
And the other thing I've heard David Paulides, and for the audience, if you're not aware of this, the Missing 411 books, that's what Chris is referring to. He had shared with that author some of the things, and about strange disappearances and whatnot. And David Paulides, that's the author of those books, he has investigated hundreds and hundreds of cases. It started off with originally 411 cases. That's why the first book was called Missing 411. It's now into the thousands, okay? But the disappearances are very strange. And a lot of them are just like what Chris described. There's a group of people walking, and somebody's in the back of the line, and they're there, and the next thing you know, they turn around and that person's not there anymore. And they can't find them. Sometimes they're never found. Sometimes they're found and they have no idea where they were. Well, like days later, nobody knows where they were. They don't know where they were. Yeah. Or they're found deceased, like sometimes children, like so far away and over mountain ranges away where they're found. How did they get there? They didn't walk that. They didn't climb a mountain. How did they get there? And there's all these cases like that. And the park services do not want this information out there.
No, so that's exactly it.
Yeah, they stand in the way a lot of David Paulides' investigations. But that's what he's referring to. And it's very interesting, that predator scenario. I have heard another case of somebody seeing something like that. And it was completely unrelated to you. I mean, someone else had talked about that. And when you said predator, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to hear this, But another thing that Paulides mentions is a lot of this strange stuff happens near areas that have very strange names, like Devil's Point or Cape Fear, or, all these Devil's Pass. Always names that were probably given, those places were probably named by American Indians who were there centuries ago, and they gave it that name for a reason.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder,
Well, the Native Americans their legends are based on something.
Yes. Yes.
There's one from the Yosemite tribe, the Yosemites,
Mm-hmm.
and they told of what they called the walkers. And in fact, they built totems to them.
Mm-hmm.
And about in the 90s, there was a video that was released that kind of went viral
Mm-hmm.
of a house in Fresno where basically Fresno is at the foot of Yosemite.
Okay.
And it showed this very, very strange looking creature, or quote, creatures,
Mm-hmm.
that were all legs. And the legs stopped and there was a head.
Mm-hmm.
There was no torso.
Yeah.
And it was walking along, and there was a smaller one behind it.
Mm-hmm.
They were walking through basically like this yard.
Yeah.
And they called it the Yosemite Creeper. And even in Yosemite, there was a recording on the Yosemite Trail of two of these creepers
Yeah.
walking along. And they're very, very, very strange. If you want to look it up, it's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
But
Yosemite Creeper, if anyone wants to look that up. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's really a lot of different things with the Indian culture. Of course, Bigfoot being a big part of it.
I've heard stories before where people talked about being in the woods and everything went eerily silent.
Yeah.
Nothing, no birds, no bugs, no
Exactly.
noises, nothing. And I've often wondered, is that an issue? Is that a situation where a portal is opening? And I don't know, but it does make you wonder. And the other thing is, in houses that are haunted, a lot of times there is technically a portal open right into that house.
Exactly.
And demons come and go through that portal. And it just makes me wonder, well, we don't know what happened in these territories centuries ago that something evil could have happened that opened a portal. The other thing is, the Bible's very clear that at one point there was a war in heaven between Satan and his angels, which was 1/3 of the angels, and Michael and his angels.
Right.
And it says the dragon and his angels prevailed not, and there was no more place found for them in heaven, and they were cast to the earth. Now, the earth realm, I believe, is you have the atmosphere of the earth. That's where they are. You have the earth itself where we live. And then you have the depths of the earth, which is hell.
Yeah.
And so that's what the demons are in those areas, and it just makes you wonder, well, it could be that there's just something there because that's where it went when they were cast to the earth, and that that's where it resides, and it loves destroying life. The one thing is, to me, is like with the missing 411 and these strange disappearances and these strange sightings.
Right.
It's evil. There's something there evil because it loves to take lives. It loves to destroy lives.
Sure.
And there's a feeling that, like with what you saw come up behind you there, it's evil. It's there's some reason why it's there. And it is definitely it's not something friendly, it's not like an angel or something good. It's evil, and you can tell it, you can feel it,
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
that is extremely interesting. I mean, I feel like these things do tie together. A lot of the Bigfoot sightings, they see it, they look away, they look back, and it's not there. Well, where did it go? And it just makes me wonder. I've always thought this anyway. But like the UFOs and the aliens and the cryptids are interdimensional beings. And to me, when I say interdimensional being, that's a demon. That's an evil spirit.
Yeah.
And I think of there's a former FBI agent named John D'Souza who went publicly within the last couple of years about a lot of what he knows.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying this stuff is interdimensional beings.
Yeah.
And the very first season of the X-Files was based on some of his real cases. He didn't release the information to the creators of the show, though. Somebody else did.
Right.
I believe they were retired FBI agents did it. It did not have anything to do with him, but they were his cases because he investigated a lot of the paranormal things for the FBI. But when he's describing these things as interdimensional, I'm thinking that's what I've always thought. That makes a lot of sense.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. It's funny that you should talk about the X-Files, because my nickname while I was a Ranger was Ranger Mulder. And the reason behind that was because, again, I was being sent across the United States by the Park Service when they couldn't figure out a strange situation.
Yeah.
They'd call me in to investigate it.
That's interesting.
Because they did not want outsiders, including outside law enforcement, taking over, because it, again, would have gotten out
Yes.
in the world that this stuff is happening. And the one thing that the Park Service does not want is loss of revenue.
Yes.
And that's why they covered all of these things. And it's
the sad part about that is I understand that it's a beautiful place and it's beautiful to visit. It's a wonderful, beautiful vacation place. And many families have great memories of visiting and all. I get all that. The other thing is, I don't think they have the slightest clue how to even deal with it. What it even really is. So they're like, well, just shut up about it and then pretend it's not happening, cover it up, because, we love this land. We love this park. It's beautiful here and we want people to visit,
Sure.
And I think that's kind of their take, they're in a position they feel compelled to cover it up,
Oh, absolutely. But we got to the point where when we would do our reports, we'd label it an X file.
Yeah.
And so then the supervisor, like I told you, would put it in a special file cabinet. It would be locked. Yep. Nothing happened with those files until, I'm not going to say Men in Black, but somebody from the government would pick those files up. Mm-hmm. And you could, you'd ask the supervisor or district supervisor, well, whatever happened on that report? What report? Yeah. The report I wrote. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah. And that, you talked about the 411 cases.
Mm-hmm.
Boy. Excuse me.
That's okay. Hey, I'm sorry you're going through all that and dealing with all that. I'm sorry.
Well, that's all right. But one of the codes in law enforcement, 411 means missing information.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
It does. It's kind of like there's a double meaning there. That's right. Very interesting.
But, you were talking about portals earlier. I've experienced 2 portals. One I visually observed with another ranger, and it was during the evening, and we were out on patrol again. We were just walking, checking campgrounds, etc. And we rounded a bend, and there was like a little tiny dot of light on the trail. And it started to expand more and more and more. And it finally opened, and it swirled around the edges. Now, this was during night, but on the other side was a green hill. It was daylight, blue skies, trees, and so forth. Now, my partner, he wanted to go through it. I said, you go through it, you may never come back.
That's right.
And so it slowly closed, and winked out of sight.
Wow.
The second time, I was stationed down at Everglades, and I was on patrol again on the boardwalks around the Everglades here, and I came to this canopy, And I walked through this canopy, and I felt like electricity going through me.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked to the other side, and I thought, this is very odd. The sun looked completely different. The sky was more intensely blue.
Mm-hmm.
There were plants that I couldn't identify. The water was much more clear.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I walked in for quite a ways. And I finally turned around and went back. I had tried calling on my radio. I didn't get anything. And finally, I walked through the canopy again. I got the tingling sensation. And the radio came back on. I was able to call in. And I went back thinking, am I suffering from heat stroke or what?
Mm-hmm.
And ironically, I hadn't.
Yeah.
But I often think maybe I walked through a portal without doing it.
That's possible. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it definitely confused me, for lack of saying. But so I've pretty well had a lot of different encounters. I'm lucky to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm very sorry for what you're going through now. I'm telling you, that's so in that case, did you guys end up, how did that case turn out where you guys were, where you saw the demonic figure? And you said that Ghost Adventures had visited that location as well. Is that correct?
Right. Prior to us going in, they did an episode. If your viewers want to watch it, just look it up online. Mm-hmm. And it's called The Demonic Melrose or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
Melrose Hotel. But you just have to look it up.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. Definitely. You know, that is, attachments, it can happen. And the thing is, like, you don't see it, so you don't know it's there. You just feel like you're having a lot of bad luck, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. But is there anything else you want to share here before we wrap up the program?
Well, I've got a ton more stories. So if you ever want to interview me again, I'd be more than happy to do so.
I would absolutely love to. Absolutely. I'll tell you what, we'll set up another interview here in the next, we'll set it up for in the next couple of weeks if you're able to do that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Awesome. And I'm telling you, we're going to pray for you. I want all the listeners to pray for Chris, that he is healed completely, if it's health issues, that they're healed. If it's it's something that's being caused by the demonic or by an attachment or anything like that, that it is severed away from him and out of his life, and he's able to heal. That, but pray in agreement with me and with anyone else who's praying, because there's a power in agreement.
Absolutely.
But and again, pray in Jesus' name, because that's where all the authority is, and that's where the deliverance comes from. But Chris, I cannot thank you enough. I'm looking forward to interviewing you again. I mean, it's really been informative. You're a wealth of knowledge, and your experiences are amazing. I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing more of them, believe me. But most definitely we'll set up for another interview again here in a couple of weeks, okay?
Okay. Sounds good, buddy. Thank you so much.
And God bless you. And I promise you, we're going to be praying for you.
And I will do the same for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that too. And to the listeners, I thank you for tuning in. Again, I'm Patrick Meekin. I'm the author of 225th Street and Nightmare in Holmes County, which both tell terrifying true stories of paranormal activity and spiritual warfare in real-life haunted houses. Both books are available on Amazon. Again, thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe and comment. God bless you for joining us. Have a good night. Goodbye.